Let's get started. My name is Deacon Scott Woolison. I've spoken once here for this year, so good to see you all again, and those who were here last time. I'll give you a brief history or a brief background of my story. I gave it last time, but for those who weren't here, this is my wife and me, our marriage day at Holy Rosary, which is near downtown. This was May 1st, 2004. After that, it was just under a year later, I was in an RCIA group myself. I was not. My wife is a cradle Catholic. I was not. I was raised in confirmed Lutheran. So this is a picture of my group, that's the church that I was at, the parish I was at that time. And so the warning here for everybody who's considering this is where it led. So be forewarned. Right? So that's my ordination. That was we were the first deacon class to be ordained by Bishop Lopes, and that was in 2020. This is a picture of us recently. This is us on our 20th wedding anniversary. I have two children. My oldest is 20. He's a sophomore at Texas A&M, and my youngest is a senior here at Memorial. So that's that. So let's talk about, we're here talking about the sacrament of marriage. I guess the first place to start is, can everybody see this? First place to start is marriage required? Of course, we know the answer to that is no. If we look in Scripture, St. Paul to the Corinthians teaches while marriage is acceptable, remaining single is a higher calling for some, allowing for undivided devotion to God. So Paul knows that both marriage and singleness are gifts from God. What he's pointing out there is our life is a gift to us. And whatever your vocation is that he has for you, in store for you, and wants you to live out, that could be in vocation of marriage, or it could be in celibacy. So, brief overview. Let's review high level what are the sacraments. We're talking about marriage, which is a sacrament. So the sacraments are efficacious signs of grace. They're efficacious. They're effective. They do what they say they're going to do because God is who he says he is. They're signs. They point to something greater than us. Signs point to something of us. So we have the sacraments, and they have form and matter, but they point to a greater thing, something greater than us. And then what are they signs of God's grace, his love for us. They point to his unmerited presence, his unmerited help, his unmerited salvation. They are instituted by Christ and entrusted to the church. So instituted by Christ. Marriage specifically was elevated by Christ to a sacrament at the wedding feast of Cana, and they're entrusted to the church. That's how they are passed through time to us today, from back over 2,000 years ago. And it's by which the divine life is dispensed to us. We actually partake in the divinity of Christ when we partake in the sacraments. So we become more like him. So at high levels, all sacraments are transformative. They're supposed to transform us. And if we receive them with the proper disposition, then we receive the grace from that. We know there's 7 sacraments. Y'all probably covered most of these, but they're the sacraments of initiation, baptism, confirmation, the first Eucharist. There's the sacraments of healing, reconciliation, and anointing of the sick, which y'all covered last week. And then the sacraments of service, which is matrimony and holy orders. So let's specifically talk about marriage as a sacrament. So the matrimonial covenant by which a man and woman establish themselves is a partnership for the whole life. As some people have said, when you get married, it is a death sentence. Not literally, but it is for life. So one of you are not walking away from marriage, all right? Which is ordered by the nature of the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of offspring. So it has to be open to life. And has been raised by Christ, the Lord, in the dignity of a sacrament between the baptized. So you can have marriages that are not between baptized people. Those are natural marriages. It has to be between the baptized that they become sacramental. And so, as we know, as we believe in the Catholic Church, and as we experience in the sacrament, that marriage is much more than a contract. Marriage is not an exchange of promises. You do make vows, but it's an exchange of persons, and a commit to enter the very life of Christ through the sacrament given by the church. And in marriage, and this is a cover from one of our deacons' marriage formation books, Deacon Delaney in San Antonio. This is the cover of his marriage formation book. What he's done here is taken Raphael's crucifixion and laid it over, put them together, compiled it with Raphael's marriage feast. And if you contemplate on this, it's a beautiful thing to understand the sacrament of marriage. Because in the sacrament of marriage, the couple imitates Christ, united by Christ, and is witness to Christ to the world. So in an imperfect way, the sacrament transforms us to become better, more like Christ. We are imitating his life, his love of us to the world by loving our beloved. So the 4 F's of marriage. Free. The Catholic Church requires for it to be a valid sacrament that both people, both the engaged beloved, have to be freely consenting to it. It can't be coerced. Full. Give fully of each other, holding nothing back. That's why the church frowns on, or only in special circumstances, will say that prenuptial agreements are acceptable, but they're very limited circumstances. It's not like I'm going to make agreements before we get married so that in case we do get divorced, I can cover my bases here. So fully of yourself. You have to be fruitful and open to life, not contracepting, and this gets into theology of the body, which is, have you all heard of theology of the body? Any of that? That's John Paul's teachings over a number of months, weeks. It's a very fruit, but there's a number of books for it. Get a condensed version of it, a summary of it, and it's very fruitful, not just for the idea of marriage, but also in general the theology of the body. And it's for life. Again, it's not something we do. We don't make a commitment for part of our time. It's for death to us apart. So, I'm going to play a video by Bishop Barron talking about the sacrament of marriage. And just give you some things to kind of think about during the marriage. Like I said, sacraments are signs that point to something greater than it's what it is. So, what does a sign, this marriage, point to? And why get married in the Catholic Church? So, keep these 2 questions in your mind as we watch this video.
Well, just a few weeks ago, I had the great good pleasure of presiding at the wedding of my niece, Brenna, and her husband, Nelson. And it was a great joy because, of course, I've known Brenna all her life. And she's always been a great person, full of joy and cheerfulness and goodness. And then Nelson, who I've known now for, also took the courageous step to become a Catholic in advance of this day. So the 2 of them are a great couple. Everyone in the church was exulting in their goodness, and just to see this young couple in love, terrific. But the point I made in my homily was, we're not here because here's this beautiful young couple in love. Because any romantic, any secular romantic could look at it and see the same thing. We were gathered in church because we saw them with the eyes of faith. And that means we saw them as a hint or a sign or an echo of God's love, of Christ's love for the church. You know, it's a peculiarity of Catholic sacramental theology that a married couple don't so much receive a sacrament as they become a sacrament. I used to tell people when I was doing parish work full-time and I was working with young engaged couples. At the time, we were all about the same age. I was in my upper 20s at the time. But I would always ask them at some point, how come you guys want to get married in church? And they'd usually say some version of, well, because we love each other. And I would say, well, that's great. I'm delighted we love each other. But that's not reason to get married in church. 2 people in love can get married on the beach in front of the Justice of the Peace. You get married in church when you're convinced that God has brought you together for his purposes. So the people gathered the other day for my niece's wedding would say this young couple did not come together just by dumb chance, but rather they were brought together by God's providence for God's purposes. And that's what we were celebrating that day in church. Now, to get a clearer sense of this, I suggested in my homily that we should look with fresh eyes at the great story of the wedding feast at Cana. So, famously in John's Gospel, the first sign, the first miraculous sign that Jesus performed is not the raising of the dead. It's not the calming of a storm at sea. It's not the healing of a blind person. The first sign he performs is providing wine at a local wedding reception. Now, everyone and his brother has commented over the centuries how wonderful, how charming that Jesus, stoops to do this very simple thing to help this distressed couple. And sure, I won't deny that, but I think we have to look a lot deeper. Because what we see there is this great motif of Jesus, the bridegroom. Jesus, who is the God of Israel made flesh, comes as the bridegroom to marry his people. Now, to get that fully, take a step back into the Old Testament. Look in the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah relays this extraordinary line. If you look at the history of religions and religious philosophy, you won't see anything quite like it seems to me. When the God of Israel says, or Isaiah says of him, your builder wants to marry you. Now again, I think spend a little time, even in prayer, with that line. Your builder, meaning the creator, the one who designed you and created you, God, wants to marry you. Now, every religion and religious philosophy will talk about God, will talk about our relation to God, following the demands of God, all of that. But here we've got the distinctively biblical approach that God wants to marry us. That means to share his life with us in the most intimate, life-giving, faithful way possible. When they were looking for the great metaphor for this faithful, life-giving, intensely personal love, they reached for the metaphor of the wedding, of the marriage. Your builder wants to marry you. God wants to share his life utterly with us. Now, present in that same prophet Isaiah, we hear that when the Messiah comes, there'll be this great banquet, a beautiful description on the holy mountain. There'll be these fine meats served, and then pure, choice wine will be served. And indeed, we hear there'll be so much wine that the very hills will run with it. Okay. Against that background, look again at the wedding feast at Cana. You don't just have, Jesus being a nice guy and helping out this young couple. He is the God of Israel made in flesh. And he presents himself in his first sign as the bridegroom of his people. Mind you, it was the responsibility of the bridegroom at a wedding reception to provide the wine, which is why the steward, when he tastes the water-made wine, comes to the bridegroom. He says, hey, what are you doing? Most people serve the good wine first, then when people have drunk a bit, they serve the bad wine. You've gone ahead and served the good wine last. Jesus, in other words, is the definitive bridegroom, come to marry his people. Another step. We hear, John gives us the details, how much wine was made. He said there were 6 stone jars, each one holding about 30 gallons of water. So Jesus makes 180 gallons of wine. What we're meant to see is the Isaiah prophecy has come true, that when the bridegroom comes, the Messiah, the very hills will run with wine. This is the full meaning, it seems to me, of the wedding feast at Cana. And this is exactly what we're meant to see now in a married couple. That's why we come into church. We see them as a hint, a sign, a sacrament of that love. Just one last observation. I mentioned how Jesus' first great sign is turning water into wine, how extraordinary, wonderful that is, how symbolically resonant it is. But then, at the wedding mass, so after I finish the homily, we move into the liturgy of the Eucharist, which culminates in what? Not just the transformation of water into wine, as marvelous as that is, but now the transformation of wine into the very blood of Jesus, which will now be poured out on behalf of the people gathered there. An even more extraordinary wedding banquet is being hosted by the Son of God, right? So every Mass is not, Robert Barron presiding something. It's Christ. I'm acting simply in persona Christi, in the person of Christ. It's Christ hosting a banquet at which he is serving his very body and blood, acting as the bridegroom come to marry his people. That's what we see. That's what we see whenever two people get married in church. And that is reason to celebrate.
So go back to those questions. So, anybody got any input? What sign does marriage point to? Input? Points to Christ as the bridegroom, his love for us, and so that is, like I said, all sacraments are signs that point to something greater. Marriage is a sacrament that points to Christ's love for us. We reflect in an imperfect way his love for us by sharing that sacrificial love with our beloved. And so, why get married in the Catholic Church? If you were Catholic and you get married outside the church, you remember what Bishop said? Why do we get married in the church? Is it because two people love each other, or what was the reason? Remember what he said?
God brought you together.
Because God brought you together, and everybody there is a witness there. And in that, in the sacrament of marriage, there's two requirements for it. I'll get into who actually is the minister of the sacrament. For a sacrament, two requirements for a marriage to be sacramental. The marriage must be valid. So if you're Catholic, in your obedience to the church by canon law, you have to be married in the church, right? You can't get married on a beach without a special dispensation from your bishop, right? And the reason is we just talked about, the bishop talked about why we get married in the church. And both parties must be baptized. To be in a valid marriage, Catholics must meet certain requirements of canon law, including the obligation to observe the church's form of marriage celebration or to be dispensed from that form. So if you're going to get married on a beach, I don't know if you understand or have a better understanding of the sacramental nature of it, you wouldn't want to get married on a beach, you want to get married in the church. And as I go through formation with I'm the marriage formation coordinator here, and I tell people there, warn them, there's a lot of planning that goes into it, and it's usually the planning of the caterers or what's going to happen after the party, and all that details, and that's all the stressful stuff, and that's the stuff that you're not even going to remember from your marriage day. It's going to be the actual marriage mass that you will have the most impact, and so that's what you really need to focus on. Let all the other stuff happen as it is. I mean, I remember after our marriage, our after party, that just flew by. I don't even know when we have it, but I remember very vividly the actual marriage. We didn't have a marriage mass because I wasn't Catholic yet. We had a marriage ceremony that was sacramental. Name escapes me. So all the Catholic who attempts to marry outside the Catholic Church fails in a valid marriage. So, this is what I was getting at. So, the ministers of a marriage. Do you know, is the priest the minister of the marriage? The priest is just there as the priest or the deacon, whoever is performing the ceremony, is just there as a witness. The two spouses, the beloveds themselves, the two people they're ministering the sacrament to each other. So the priest is just there as a witness for the church. It's the actual couple that is the ministers of the sacrament. If you think about that, that's a beautiful thing, because that's going to be their minister to them for the rest of their lives. So they mutually confer upon each other the marriage bond, expressing by their consent. That's where the church, through the marriage formation process, make sure that both parties are in this marriage freely. They have to be free to enter that marriage. They can't be coerced. And the essential requirement for a valid marriage is exchange of consent to a lifelong, faithful, life-giving relationship. And so that's where, if you get into theology of the body and understand it more, the church's teaching against contraception, against that is all based on sacrament of marriage being open to life at all times, everywhere. So it's when you get into trying to parse out, say, I'm going to delve off on the topic real quick, but the whole theology of the body, where the contraception issue came up, was when the Episcopal Church decided that it was okay for contraception as long as the marriage was open to life. Not meaning that just the marriage in general. Sometime down the road, we're going to be open to life. That was kicked around by theologians in the Catholic Church, and Pope Paul VI came by and said, no, not just the marriage, but every act of the marriage has to be open to life. Every part of it, not just when you want to, it's all have to be in there. So that's the whole reason for that it's a sin to contracept, because you're not giving yourself fully to your beloved in that act. And when that happens, when you start to separate that out, they become a means to an end. That means they just become an object, because you're not fully opening yourself up. You're saying, I want you for just this, not for whatever may come out of this. So that's, when you get that understanding and delve deeper into it, you can see why, as they went to the studies, and Pope Paul VI said, when you start the contraception, it's going to lead to the objectifying of people. It's going to lead to all this stuff that opens the door to that, right? Turn this off. So that's why it's such a requirement that the marriage and each act in the marriage be open to life fully. So that's why I said you can have a natural marriage, which is a baptism. It's not required to be able to exchange consents. It is a valid marriage. If you're non-Catholic and you get married and you're not baptized, that is a natural marriage. It's valid, it's just not sacramental. At this time, the church has laws that regulate only Catholics' attendance. So if you are outside the church, whatever it may be, Episcopal, whatever it is, you're baptized and you get married, but you are in a valid sacramental marriage. Because you are not Catholic and you are not bound by the canon law. So if you come into the church and you're both already baptized and married outside the church, you're in a valid sacramental marriage. But if you're not, if you were Catholic and you got married outside the church, then you have to go through a process for invalidation, because you're not in a valid marriage at that point. So convalidation is a Catholic ceremony that recognizes and legitimizes a civil marriage. You're in a marriage, it's civil, but it's not a valid sacramental marriage between a Catholic and another person. This doesn't mean that a Catholic can't marry a non-Catholic. I'm an example of that. A Catholic, I was non-Catholic when I married my wife, so you have to get a dispensation of cult. That's fine. You get married by that. If you have a Catholic person in the marriage, they have to be obedient to canon law. So what they have to do afterwards is come back and convalidate, which means in Latin to strengthen up, to affirm it. So why is it needed? Because the Catholic Church doesn't recognize the marriages that are performed within the Catholic Church. Again, why? Because of the reason that Bishop Barron said there in that video. A Catholic may have been married to a non-Catholic ceremony because of the justice of peace, minister, or rabbi. So we have to convalidate that marriage. Part of that is we have to make sure that there's no other marriages before or anything like that. So it requires a canonical form and the consent of an authorized person. They go through a marriage preparation process that includes meeting with the members of the clergy, completing preparation of the sacrament, and planning the ceremony. So they may need to provide copies of the baptism certificate. They may need to seek an annulment of previous marriages. The couples participate in a ceremony where their vows are renewed in front of a priest and 2 witnesses. So like marriage formation for engaged couples, there's also a formation process for convalidation. And so convalidation reconciles the couple to the church and God, and it brings the marriage of dignity to a sacrament, which gives the couple their family new graces in life. Again, as we talk about sacraments, or we receive the graces if we're in the proper disposition. Grace is God's help, God's promise is God's presence, and God's salvation, God's strength. And in the sacrament of marriage, y'all married, you know it's very critical to receive those graces. And I encourage you that if you are married, never forget about the sacrament and the promises you make. Because when you're in the church and you're exchanging vows, you're exchanging the vows with each other, but you're exchanging those vows in the presence of God, who's not going to abandon you ever in that sacrament. And He will give you the grace and the strength to get through anything, any troubles, anything that you have that might be easy, might be difficult, but but it will be transformative. So let's just talk about how we prepare couples here at Our Lady of Walsingham. The process, and I can tell you this process, I got married, I was a little older at the time. My wife was older than me, and I won't say how old she was because she would get me in trouble, or she might tell you. But, so when we approached the church, like I said, I was outside the church, and we came, and she was cradle Catholic, and we met with, she had a deacon friend, and he said, oh, it's going to be a minimum of 6 months before you can get married. And I'm like, I said, 6 months? What are you, I'm old, what are you talking about? And so I thought, this is just another one of those Catholic rule things, right? You're controlling me, want me to do stuff. It's crazy. And then I said, but I'll keep an open mind and go through it. And it was just after the first meeting, we went in there, we'll talk about, we did a focus inventory, I'll explain what that is. It was just after that first meeting that it opened my eyes to everything that I didn't know about the Catholic Church, and it made me realize that the formation process is not about them controlling me, it's about me opening up and seeing that I have a loving church that cares about my marriage so much that they actually want to make sure that I'm properly formed in it, that I'm making a commitment, that I'm just not rushing into anything, even though I don't care how old I was or how much I knew, how much wisdom I had. And that was just a beautiful thing. It's what brought me here and what's brought me to stand up here tonight, and why I'm the marriage formation coordinator. But I want to share that experience and form that with others going through it. So we have 3 phases in our marriage formation. The first phase is in the church. We have records, so getting all the sacramental records together. That's phase 1. So if you come to us and look on the website and say, I want to get married, it says 9 months minimum out front, because we have to gather all the records, get everything together so that we can ensure that you're entering into a valid Catholic marriage. And then from there, it's handed off to me once all the records are in, and I do phase 2, which is actually the formation part of it. And we have 3 components of that, and I'll talk about that. And then after they complete phase 2, which is the 6 months process, then it's handed back to our planning, and then that's where the ceremony is for. So if you come to our meetings for an orientation for the marriage formation, say I want to get married, we have an orientation meeting, and we tell you what the different phases are, and we show you what they are. So the first phase is the witness of love marriage formation. This is phase 2. The first part of it, the phase 2, is the witness of love marriage formation. And that is where you, ideally, and now we're coming to it, you will have a mentor couple, and they will walk through you through this formation program with you. It's 6 meetings, and it usually lasts 6 months. It goes over, you schedule your meetings with your mentor couple. We have a retreat, and then one of the clergy members attends one of the meetings. And so it's a great program from the fact that you have an anchor in the parish, someone who's walked through the formation process with you. There's a requirement for the mentor couple. That's what we have up here. We say, you need to locate a mentor couple. Here's what they have to do. And the big thing is, I'm highly against assigning mentor couples. I want you to go out and find your own mentor couple. That way, because it's someone you admire, not someone I just assigned to you, right? They practice and active in their Catholic faith. They attend church regularly. They've been married in the church for at least 5 years. And someone who will hold you accountable, inspire you, and challenge you, and who is not immediate relative. We don't want someone's parents being the mentor couple for somebody there. I don't know if that would turn out real well. So that's the first aspect of it. So you get a mentor couple, and we start this Witness of Love formation program. The second aspect of it is focus inventory. And what is that? Focus stands for acronym for facilitating open couple communication, understanding, and study. Now, some people call this the test, and it's not a test. It's an inventory. Very clear about this. There is no pass-fail this. But what it does is that couples take this inventory separately. We get it's compiled, and we get the results of it, the answers, and then we sit down with them. And so it has different categories in here, like match, categories to match lifestyle expectations, friends and interests, personality matches, personal issues, skills, communications, problem solving, bonders, integrators. So it has these different categories, and they'll meet with a clergy member about 3 or 4 times to go over the results, to go over a different section. And again, it's not a test. There's no right or wrong answers. Just a snapshot in time. We know the sacrament is transformative. As you get deeper and deeper into the mystery of the sacrament, you're going to change. Things are going to change. You're going to transform. So it's not what happens when they're engaged is not going to be what their looks like 10, 5, 20 years down the road. It's a way to open up conversations. And this is one of the things that I found very beautiful about it is we think we know everything we want to talk about, but there's always something we forget to ask, forget to talk about. And this opens up that conversation. It's formation for the marriage process. It's not a test. There's no pass-fail. They don't say, no, you failed it. You guys are not going to happen. Or you scored 100. We don't even talk about it. No. It's not as a predictive tool. It doesn't predict if you're going to be a successful marriage or whatnot. And what we do is it's not copied or saved. There is a summary of it. It's called a couples report that we give to the couples when they're done. And it's just a high-level summary. That's the only thing that's ever kept from it. And we actually put that part in, and we give it to the couples, and it's also put in their marriage formation record. This is the witness to love. Like I said here, you'll do the initial meeting with the clergy, then they're assigned a mentor couple coaching meeting, and then the mentor couples and the mentees meet and go through the process. And the last part is NFP, natural family planning. Has anybody heard of NFP, natural family planning? Yes. Okay, natural family planning this goes back to as part of theology of the body, as part of Humanae Vitae, when Paul VI said, no, we're not going to join everyone and say that contraception is allowed. He said, we understand that there's a real need. We understand that this is a reason why people are asking contraceptive. They want it to be approved. Because we understand that we've changed from a society where we had crops and we needed 20 kids out there in the field to work, right? They're laborers, so to speak, but we need help, to now a more industrial society. So we need to have, our church has to have some response to this. It has to be able to help the faithful. And so he said we need to start studying the science of this. And this is relatively new. And if you haven't heard about NFP or don't know anything about it, when you get into it, it will literally change your whole aspect of as far as women's health. It's an amazing thing. So what it does is, at first there was the rhythm method, which didn't work, right? It was a calendar. The NFP is based on a woman's cycle, and the rhythm method was just every 30 days off, whatever. So that didn't work because it actually didn't account for the individual person and individual circumstances. So what NFP is, there's a couple of different methods, but they all are based on the same thing. It actually goes through and the couple track the marriage, the wife's fertility every day. And so you know when the wife is fertile and when she's not fertile. And so you can use it to achieve pregnancy, or you can use it to delay pregnancy if there's good reason for it. So NFP is just a method of understanding a woman's cycle, but even more than that, there's the beauty of it for my wife and for every female that begins to understand it, you actually get a better insight of your own health. There's so many indicators in that you can take it, and we're blessed now in Houston. We have a number of practitioners, OB-GYN, that are trained or are trained in this, so they can actually bring your charts into them, and they can track and pick up on stuff that probably wouldn't be able to pick up or understand. So NFP is the third part of this. We require that they take a course. We offer a couple different options. They're all, like I said, they're all very similar. They just use different indicators. So my point on this is I tell the couples, if you do one method and you don't like it, it's not working for you, don't give up on it. Try a different method, because they're all a little bit different personalities. I'm an engineer by background, so I love the syntothermal was data. There was charts and all kinds of stuff. My wife was more abstract, so it's too much data. I need something that's a little bit simpler. So the Creighton method is what we ended up using after going through the syntothermal for about a year or two. So that's the topic. Any questions or comments? Yes.
Okay, I know I'm older, but I work at a pro-life center, and we refer people to NFP because they come in and say, I had this thing inserted in my arm, I have all these symptoms, etc. And explain to them, one, you're not putting chemicals in your body that's going to harm you, right? And two, it fosters that the burden is not on just one person like it is if you take a pill, you know. And if you forget, and then the other person's fault. So you both, you grow closer in your relationship. So that's the difference.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's true. It's crazy how, as a society, there's a movement and we want to be natural and green and do all this stuff healthy, but yet we'll take contraceptives and put them in our bodies. So this is it's really a gift from the church, and it's just not out there. Like I said, it's relatively new, 1960, 65 church life. So it's another thing that opened my eyes to. You're just not going to hear this in the mainstream, and people don't understand that it is a natural method that's purely 100% natural and purely 100% open to life every time for every act. And you said something, I don't remember what I was saying, but yeah, it's also for us, like I said, we got married a little older, and it was, my wife always, we had our first fairly a year after we were married, and everything went fine, and then we ran into issues and had a couple of miscarriages. And this was a very helpful thing to understand that. Like I say, without this, we wouldn't have our youngest son, because of the doctor's help that were able to intervene and support the pregnancy from our woman, right? So it's a beautiful thing. There's a lot of help there, and there's a lot of things that you can find when you put these chemicals in your body and change your cycle or your hormones. For women, hormones are critical, right? And this is another thing, as I said, this is another great communication tool, because as you pointed out, it doesn't put the burden on one person. NFP is required. It's a couple things. They both have to be involved in it. So they both are charting, they're both in it daily. And from that, one benefit that I tell the gentlemen is that some days, if you're charting NFP and you know the cycles, you'll be ahead and understand why your jokes aren't as funny some days as they might think when they be other days. So it's a great communication tool. Oh, I need to walk a little softer today because there's been a dump of hormones, my beloved, that is going through the natural cycle. So it's a great communication tool from that. That's another aspect of it. So it's really a beautiful thing. That's why we have part of one of the major components for marriage formation, and it's pretty standard in all. I don't think it's any marriage formation in the Catholic Church that doesn't have NFP. But on that note, one of these methods is something you learn from somebody trained in it. We have Lou and Jean who teach it here, and for the symptothermal method. Bayard teaches the Craven method, and another one. But don't pick up. I know we're big on apps. Don't do this on an app without proper training, because it can be a recipe for ending up not getting what you think you're getting. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
How do you respond to somebody who tells you NFP is basically Catholic birth control?
Right. So that goes into, if you look at Humana Vitae and you look at the wording in there, the language in there, Paul VI, he says that it's for a couple. A couple, that's a big word. A couple to discern what a grave matter is to them, right? So it's not for me to say, it's not for somebody else to say. It's not for Father Huff to say. The church is not going to that we're not going to give you the guidance and say, that is not a grave matter. That is for the couple to decide between themselves to determine what a grave matter is. There's no definition of grave in there, so it's for the couple to discern. So it's not something we can give you guidance on, we'll talk to you about, but it's not our call. Again, that's between the couple. So if there's someone outside saying that's just Catholic birth control, what other option do they want you to do? I could just open up. So there's instances where you can imagine a couple at some point it could get too much for a mother or her father to have 15 kids, 8 kids, right? And so it would materially affect their mental health. Maybe one kid, it's 2 kids. It's something for the couple to discern. So I don't think anyone can sit outside and say, oh, you're doing Catholic birth control because you're doing naturally and you're open to every act. I don't know that. I would tell them that's really none of their business beyond that. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
At what point is convalidation necessary? Per se, let's say somebody was a Protestant before they became Catholic, and they got married to a man who believed in God but was not practicing anything. So at what point is it necessary or not necessary convalidation?
Were you both? Was there a Catholic involved in the marriage?
No. So I was a Protestant, non-denominational, and I had a regular officiant. It was a very random, let's make this happen type thing. And then my husband at the time believed in God, but he was not practicing it. He just was on his own journey of belief system and trying to figure that out. But I am devout Christian now.
Right. So for that's kind of like a special case-by-case basis,
Right.
and so you kind of have to just look into the background of this. So are you talking to Terry about that or anything?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we'll just handle it, look into the situation on that, but Mario can give you more than that. You have a question?
Yeah, so if a Catholic marries outside of the church, how does that affect their good standing within the church to receive the Eucharist?
You're supposed to be in a valid marriage before you partake in the sacrament. So if you're not in a valid marriage, you should be convalidated at that point, right? So that's what I'm saying. You receive the sacraments with a proper disposition. So that's getting the convalidation would be a critical thing to get so that you're in a valid marriage. Yeah.
I had a friend who he married a woman who was Catholic. He was not even Catholic. But he was married in the Catholic church. They weren't able to have a full Catholic mass. But I was curious about I know there was some things that he had to agree to before he could actually get married. I was curious what all the church allows for within someone marrying outside of the church.
I think it just handled on a case-by-case basis. So as long as, like I said, you can get married outside the church, you just have to get the proper disposition from your bishop. So he could just, it's really on the circumstances. I mean, it can be allowed where you can have the ministers are the couples themselves, right? So it's not, the priest is just there as a witness. So there's been times when maybe the bride's dad's a Orthodox minister or something, something so that he's actually part of the ceremony. But it's just a matter of getting the proper approval beforehand. It's not that there's set rules, but there's set rules, but if you want to get outside of those, make sure you get the dispensation for those. So, yeah.
So ideally, Catholics will marry another Catholic, and it's allowed for Catholics to marry other Christians. I've also heard that the church is able to grant a dispensation so that a Catholic could marry a non-Christian.
Right.
My question is, in what case would the church grant that dispensation?
It depends on the circumstances. So you have to kind of just look on it, look at what the circumstances. I can't think of any that come to mind, but I mean, it is, if you get the proper dispensation, it can be allowed. So maybe there's children involved beforehand or something like that. Who knows? Right? But I mean, in the book, I don't know off the top of my head, But one of St. Paul's letters, he goes into this as well, saying that a believing spouse can save a non-believing spouse, right? And so that's the way Paul's letter is saying that even if they're not Christian, a Christian spouse can save a non-Christian spouse. So I think that's kind of the basis for allowing stuff like that. Just depends on what the circumstances are. But the point is, if you want to do something outside of canon that's not canonical, get permission beforehand, right? Ask for dispensations, and then that way that the bishop can look at it and say, yeah, this is a special circumstance. This is what we can be allowed. So the big thing is not that, like I said, we have all these rules that you have to follow. No, it's more of that you get the full benefit and full purpose of the sacrament. To be there, as Bishop Barron said, you have the sacramental mass. And if you go back to where the wedding feast at Cana, the symbol where he turned water into wine, now you take it even further. You've made your vows in front of the church, in front of Christ. It's going to be the third chain of the rope in your marriage. And now he's the host. He turns the wine into his body and blood himself and gives that to you. Any other questions? Yep.
I know actually multiple people who were catechized as Catholics, then they left the faith and then they got married, but their marriages were either like they were outside of the church. Would their marriages be invalid from the church?
If they're Catholic, yeah, if they got married outside the church, they're not in a valid marriage.
So would they go through that process of being
Convalidation, yes. Yeah. They go through it. It's just a matter of going through the convalidation process to, like I said, come back and reconcile with the church from there. Any other questions? Thank you all for your time again tonight. Let's close in prayer.